Alright class, settle down and let me tell you a story. A few months back, we decided to get into Warhammer Fantasy starting with the factions, and now that we're back and we've done some digging, it turns out that it's up to us to actually put it all together in chronological order, starting with the old world. But before we do, please like, share, subscribe, do the whole notification button thing to help me out with the algo, and here we go. Of course, we got Arbiter Ian, the timeline of the old world in 20 minutes. Warhammer lore. So we've actually had him before, and actually he's one of the better ones, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of Warhammer content. But here's the thing, right? When we decided, I think it was Pancreas No Work, there was a bit of a discussion regarding the chronological order of the games in Warhammer Fantasy. And if I got it right, it's basically old world, and then there was the general fantasy setting, and then there was the end times, and finally the age of Sigmar, where Sigmar returns to help out the empire that was destroyed. Anyways, comments please if I had that wrong this entire time. I mean, I've been gone for like 2 months, and now that we're officially back now, we're gonna get our streaming schedule back soon. So anyways, why don't we simply begin and let's go.
Hi gang, once long ago there was a world, an old world.
Holy no shit, Sherlock. Because no, I'm sorry, you know what, let's keep on going first before I run my mouth.
A world consumed in the fires of rebranding mostly, but it's back. The old world game is out and the world of legend has returned. So in this video, let's peer back into the mists of time and run through the history of the old world.
There we go. If I'm not mistaken, because here's the thing, right? You've got old world and then general fantasy setting, end times, and then AOS. And here in the old world, I believe this is the medieval era, and then the general fantasy setting always looked to me like it's in the Renaissance period. But anyways, let's keep on going.
If you're relatively new to Warhammer or Age of Sigmar, you might not recognize the old world, but the story I'm going to tell in this video has been around for a long time. Before Age of Sigmar, Games Workshop's flagship fantasy game, in fact, the original Warhammer game, was called Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Its setting was a single planet, the Warhammer.
There was a lot of shifting, there was a lot of jumping. That's why this whole thing always devolves into a discussion as to when and how. I can't even remember if it was this time that Sigmar formed the empire, and then he sort of ascended into godhood, and then there was the general fantasy setting, and then there was the end times where where the world was destroyed or the empire was destroyed, and then Age of Sigmar is when he returns back to the world in order to help out what's left of the empire or the survivors. It actually gets confusing because of all of this rebranding, but you know what? Hopefully we're back in the old world. This is quote unquote the beginning of the entire thing. Hopefully it's all clear, or Ian clears it up for us.
World. No, not that one. And most of its storylines took place on a single continent of that planet called the Old World, in the same way that explorers in the Age of Sail called America the New World.
So you're
over 8 editions of this game, its stories were fleshed out and it acquired thousands of years of history, all of which ended when the game was discontinued in 2015. The Warhammer world was destroyed. That was actually written into the story, and its inhabitants made their way into the new mortal realms, the setting for its replacement, Age of Sigmar. But now, it's back. Games Workshop have released a
That's what makes it so confusing. I've got people buying up old world units because you know what, this is like the prologue, right? And people are buying up the prologue. Confusing. You know what, my next demo setup for Blood Bowl anyway and Trench Crusade I'm gonna figure it out, alright?
New game called, slightly confusingly, The Old World, and the legends and histories of yore have been resurrected like a happy Nehekaran skeleton. So, armed with a copy of the Old World rulebook, let's retell the creation myth of this huge setting and find out how all its factions came to be.
There we go.
But before I start, some disclaimers. First, there's a lot of worlds floating about, so let's just clarify. This place, the entire planet, used to be called the Warhammer world, but now seems to be called the World of Legend. That's the setting, like the Mortal Realms. This continent on it is called the Old...
I'm assuming the warp, oh my god, that's going to be a can of worms, like you can access the warp, standing on Terra. Yeah. Oh my god. It's gonna get more confusing. You know what, never mind. Let's stick to topic, people.
Old World, and that's where the game takes place, so the game's called The Old World 2, but in this video, I'm going to tell the story of kind of the entire planet, more or less.
Yeah, we definitely need to stick to topic, because I just thought of something that, what if you can access the warp? Because if this is the mortal realm, if this is the mortal world, does that mean that in this particular setting, you can access the warp? While standing on Terra, while standing in the middle of a city or something. Anyways, one for the philosophers. We're not doing 40k right now.
Second, although all of this stuff is heavily based on the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle setting, we shouldn't assume it's exactly the same. We don't know how much is being kept or what will change. So for that reason, though I'm going to use imagery from across all editions, all the lore in this video comes directly from the Old World gamebooks. This is the story as it is now. The Old World game is set around the year 2276 of the Imperial calendar, but our story begins millennia before that, and like so many Games Workshop settings, it begins with some magic space frogs.
Okay, so we're going back into the past, Old World. Alright, so our previous discussion before is sort of spot on, I think. Because chronologically speaking, the present setting with Karl Franz and everything is the general fantasy setting. Before then, they came up with the old. Then came the End Times, and then AOS, and then a jump back into the Old World. Because might as well sell the prologue, right?
The Old Ones came into the world around 17,000 years ago. They were an incredibly powerful species of travellers, able to move from world to world in great silver ships, and for whatever reason, they had decided that this place would be perfect for whatever unknowable froggy schemes they had. What they found was a cold world orbiting far from its star and dominated by giant creatures, leviathans of the deep, tunneling beasts, great gargants, many of them intelligent, and the most powerful were the dragons. But none of them could stand against the Old Ones' magic. They built networks of nodes, great world engines to reshape the continents. They moved the entire planet closer to its star, warming the climate, and armies of lizard men and their slan overseers, the servants of the Old Ones, forced the beasts back into the dark places of the world.
It's amazing, look.
All except one, the celestial dragon, who, instead of fighting the Old Ones, chose to observe and learn from them. Over the next 9,000 years, the Old Ones seeded the world with new species. First, the magical...
Alright, so we're definitely counting down to the regular fantasy setting.
Elves on their island of Ulthuan, then the dwarves through the World's Edge Mountains in the Old World, and later the primitive tribes of men, and finally the halflings and the ogres, and more crept in too. Stowed away on the great silver ships of the Old Ones were the first orcs and goblins who escaped into this new planet. The species thrived, and this reshaping continued for millennia, but 8,000 years before the present day, something went wrong. The Old Ones' power came from a strange other dimension that they manipulated to their will like magic. At the poles of this new world, they constructed two great gates, portals into this other realm that allowed them to come and go as...
So they can access the warp rooms while standing on Terra.
they pleased, but there
interesting.
were things that lived in this other dimension, and they whispered at the door, eager to get through. They whispered on the winds of magic that flowed from the gates, corrupting some of the younger races into believing they were gods.
Of
With every
course.
mortal corrupted, their power grew until the great portals bent and broke, shattering into rifts in reality,
Because why
great
not?
ragged holes into the realm of chaos, a storm of magical energy pouring out over the world, so powerful that a new moon was formed in the sky. Morsley, the Chaos Moon, made from raw black
So this is the equivalent of the birth of Slanesh or something.
warpstone, the solidified energy of chaos. In the few hundred years after this cataclysm, the Old Ones disappeared, and many of the older Slan, the ones who knew their master's plans, were killed attempting to stabilize the world. Chaos swept over the land, infecting the soil and twisting the creatures of the forests into mutants. Legions of demons pouring from the poles, and the first war against chaos began.
There we go.
Hordes of demons fought legions of lizard men as the servants of the Old Ones attempted to preserve what was left of their master's plans, but the temple cities were overrun, and the Slan pushed
Slowing
back to
down.
the southern continent of Lustria. But they didn't fight alone. In the World's Edge Mountains, Grungni, ancestor god of the Dwarves, urged his people to fortify their holds, and Grimnir, the warrior god, led huge armies that
course.
marched from their mountains to hold back the tide. In the
Why
land of
not?
Ulthuan, the elven wanderer Ainarian cast himself into the sacred flame of their creator god, Azurian, emerging unscathed as the first Phoenix King of the Elves. And alongside the mage Calidor, united his people, the glittering hosts of the elves winning many victories against the darkness. And in the Far East, the last of the great dragons, the Celestial Dragon, who'd learned from the Old Ones, looked down upon the primitive tribes of men and took pity on them, fighting back the demonic hordes and insulating them from the worship of gods and monsters.
So the humans actually had a patron with regards to the celestial dragons. Alright, got it. But where does Sigmar come in? Comments, please.
War continued for hundreds of years, with great losses on both
Clock definitely
sides.
slowed
In
down.
Ulthuan, a demonic incursion killed Astariel, the ever queen of Ainarian, and stole away his two children. The Phoenix King became a vengeful figure, drawing the blade Widowmaker from the shrine of the war god Cain, and setting up court in dark Nagaraith to the west of the island, with his new queen, Morathi. Mountain holds were lost, overwhelmed as their dwarven defenders fell, and in Lustria, the great capital of Itza came under siege from an army of demons. All seemed lost until, in a year described in this calendar handily as
I've been invited to do Spearhead, to do a demo for Spearhead, but I'm already playing Civ. It's fantasy. Alright, I feel like I'm tiptoeing around from playing 40k. That's why as soon as I get the green light for Kill Team, I'm definitely gonna get into Kill Team. It's just that I've been told to hold off because there are going to be actual developments before Christmas, I hope. Or is it, after the New Year celebration or something that they're going to have a Kill Team update. So I've been told to hold off from now. And I've been told to just to chill with regards to Warhammer in the meantime, since our national tournament is coming up for Civ. But I'm not really sure if I'm going to touch the Warhammer fantasy setting for the simple reason I'm already playing fantasy, alright? If anything, I am going to skip over and do sci-fi next, which is, regular old 40k, or at the very least Kill Team.
minus 4420. I know.
And of course, there's also Blood Bowl, but like I said, there's like only 4 active players in the country, and one of them isn't even in the island for the simple reason. I know that for a fact, for the simple reason that I was the one who drove him to the airport. Anyways.
3 things happened. In Itza, the oldest of the Slan, Lord Croak, finally died. But set free from its body, Croak became more powerful than ever and banished the besieging demon hordes. In the old world, Grimnir, enraged at the loss of dwarven life, took the first Slayer oath, cutting his beard and spiking his hair before setting off into the northern realm of chaos to enter the rift and kill the Chaos Gods themselves. And Kalidor Dragon Tamer, fearing what would happen as his friend Einarion fell further into madness, enacted a great ritual, sacrificing himself and many of the other elven mages to create a magical vortex above Ulthuan that would drain the magic from the world even as it continued to pour in through the polar rifts. And eventually, 1,000 years after the Great Cataclysm, the storm of magic subsided. What followed was an age of recovery. The elves crowned a new Phoenix King, passing over Einarion and Marathi's son, Malarian, and anointing instead Bel-Shanar, the explorer, who founded colonies of elves across the world, while the dwarves spread through its mountains, some venturing far to the east to Zorn Ozkal, the great skull land between the World's Edge Mountains and the Mountains of Morn. The elves and dwarves in the old world became great allies, trading and pushing back those remnants of the war against chaos to the north and to the deep forests. In the far east, the lands that had been protected from the predations of chaos by the celestial dragon united as the empire of Grand Cathay and its astromancers brought forth a great warpstone meteorite to ruin the lands of their enemies, the ogres of the Mountains of Morn, creating a colossal crater known as the Great Maw. But this new prosperity was about to be plunged into disarray again. Malarian, son of Einarion and Marathi, assassinated Bel-Shanar and declared himself Phoenix King, and a civil war known as the Sundering broke out amongst the elves. At the height of the war, the dread King Malarian attempted to unbind the magical vortex and unleash the power of chaos over Ulthuan, but he couldn't control it, and the brief surge of power destroyed his homeland of Nagaraith, fracturing it into the sea. Malarian, Marathi, and their followers were defeated and fled over the seas to the north, to the cold and inhospitable lands of Nagaroth, eventually becoming the Dark Elves. But Malarian carried on plotting. Raiders from Nagaroth attacked dwarven caravans in the old world and cheated the dwarves out of their gold, and when the dwarf High King, Gotrek Starbreaker, sent emissaries to complain to...
So, question is, are these ongoing and subsequent wars, does this make up the old world, the setting of the old world? Comments, please.
Ulthuan, the new Phoenix King, Kalidor II, was so enraged, he sent the ambassador home with his beard shaved. The resulting War of the Beard lasted 400 years until Kalidor II was slain and the Phoenix crown claimed as a prize by the dwarfs, and the new Phoenix King, Caradriel, recalled all high elves from the old world, cutting ties with the dwarves and retreating back to Ulthuan. Those elves who chose to remain would eventually abandon the ports and cities and retire to the forest of Athel Loren, becoming the Wood Elves. But while the elves and dwarves fought their wars, a new power rose as the primitive tribes of men in the old world formed their first empires. In minus 2500 by the imperial calendar, during the Sundering, Setra united the great necropolis cities of Nehekara, founding a dynasty that would last hundreds of years and send its armies all across the world. 500 years later, elven mages from Nagaroth were diverted in a storm and came to Kemri, greatest of the Nehekaran cities, where their knowledge was eagerly absorbed by the Prince of Kemri, a man called Nagash. Nehekara and Grand Cathay weren't the only human empires of the time. The city of Tylos had risen as a trading post of dwarves and men in northern Tilia, a few hundred years after Nehekara. But when its citizens celebrated their success with a great monumental bell, and it tolled for the first time, the population were drowned in a rain of warpstone and a tide of squeaking horror that erupted from its mines, and it was consumed by the blighted marshes. So although Nehekara wasn't the only civilization in the old world at that time, it was definitely the longest lived. Maybe that's the wrong choice of words. The kings of Nehekara had long been obsessed by their own mortality, building great pyramids to house their remains, but none had cracked the secrets of eternal life until Nagash, who, as priest king of Kemri, distilled an elixir from human blood to extend his own life, bent the resources of his city to increasing his sorcerous power, and raised legions of skeletons skeletons to conquer the whole of Nehekhara, but he underestimated his enemies, and the remaining priest kings of the other cities united against him and eventually defeated him. He fled to Cripple Peak,
So
where he
it was his own undoing, that search for immortality.
ruled over
Typical.
an empire of degenerate humans and undead as he continued to gather power. The next few centuries were known by the dwarves as the Time of Woes. The elves retreated from the old world, and the dwarves came under attack from hordes of goblins and orcs, and even the first Skaven. Where could they have come from? Who knows? Eventually abandoning their holds on the east of the World's Edge Mountains, it wouldn't be until hundreds of years later that some of the lost eastern holds will be retaken. Back in Nehekhara, the stolen tomes of Nagash have been long studied by the nobility of the city of Lamia, who created a lesser version of this elixir, granting themselves unnaturally long life, but also a thirst for the blood
Okay, so now we're looking at the history of the vampires.
of the living. When the rest of the Nehekaran cities united again to drive out these new vampires, they found refuge in the court of Nagash. The great necromancer attacked Nehekhara again and again, but united under the priest king Alcadizar the Conqueror, they were defeated until Nagash released a magical plague on the land, striking down everyone except Alcadizar, who was brought in chains to Cripple Peak. But while Nagash prepared a great ritual to resurrect the population of Nehekhara as a colossal army of skeletons, Alcadizar was freed by some furry allies and, armed with a blade of horrific power, killed Nagash, escaping with his crown. Don't worry, he'll be back. A lot. Anyway, the ritual was disrupted and Nagash was temporarily killed, but the spell was so powerful the population of Nehekhara remained animated under the control of their long-dead Tomb Kings, including the original Tomb King, Cetra. For the next 1,000 years, the tribes of men settled in the northern Old World grew and prospered. In the far west, around the forest of Athel Loren, the Bretonni tribes settled. As in the east, the Dwarven realms shrank again under constant attack from orcs and goblins.
So we can see that, you know what, the old world or Europe is starting to form. 600 years left.
Until all the mountains between Mad Dog Pass and Karak Eight Peaks were in goblin hands. The dwarves stepped up trade relations with these new human realms, helping Arthur of the Tudor gens found the city of
they were the more reasonable type.
Middenheim. A few years later, in the lands that would become the Empire, to the Umberogan tribe, a man called Sigmar.
There we go, Sigmar!
And became a great friend to the dwarves. He rescued the dwarven king, Kurgan Ironbeard, from orc captivity, receiving Gal Maraz, the Skull Splitter, in return, and together they won the Battle of Blackfire Pass, destroying a colossal orc army and driving the orcs back from human and dwarf lands for years. The following year, Year 0 of this new calendar, a twin-tailed comet was seen in the sky, and the year after, Sigmar was crowned emperor by the high priest of Ulrich. The next half-century was something of a golden age for this new empire. Dwarves settled in its lands and contributed to its advancement. Orc and goblin raids were kept at bay, and a huge invasion by a resurrected Nagash campaigning north in search of his lost hat was defeated, and Nagash himself felled by Sigmar at the Battle of the River Reich. After 50 years of rule, Sigmar established the system of elector counts to continue governance of his empire and disappeared into the east. And over the next century, he became revered as a god, the patron god of the new empire as it continued to grow. A few hundred years later, the second great old world civilization of man arose as Gilles le Breton united the tribes of the Bretonni and drove...
Alright, so we are now looking at the medieval age. I'm assuming this whole thing was the end of the Bronze Age, where people were still comforting themselves in loincloths. You know, Conan the Barbarian type deal or something. So, or no, it's not the bronze, more like we've entered the Iron Age, and now here at this particular point in time at year 1028 1028 humanity or finally entered the medieval ages. Okay.
The orcs and goblins out of their lands, creating the kingdom of Bretonia. The human realms expanded further, but as the second millennium of this new calendar started, they were plagued with decline. And also, like plague. Released by the Skaven, the Black Plague swept through the old world, leading to the rise of the necromancer Van Hel in the spooky eastern provinces of the Empire, in the land of Sylvania, where the Skaven waged war with the shambling...
Of course, it's going to be Sylvania. I mean, I was honestly thinking of, Romania or something, but no.
Hordes of zombies. They were both defeated by Count Mandrid Skavenslayer, who became emperor, but when he was assassinated in 1152, the courts wouldn't agree on a new emperor, and so the empire split into a number of separate factions. In 1494, the final human kingdom of this era emerged as the Khan Queen Mishka led the Gospodars through the High Pass and drove back the Ongol tribes. Her daughter would become the first Tsarina of Kislev and a bulwark against chaos invasion. But in the empire, the split only worsened.
Valhalla Ice Warriors, I guess.
As more electors declared themselves the real inheritor of Sigmar, weakening the land as it came under attack again and again from...
The party can't last forever, and here we are.
The same old foes. In 1681, Nagash returned, 1666 years after being banished by Sigmar, and towns and villages across the empire were destroyed by undead hordes. A few years later, the Orc War Ironclaw devastated the southern province of Solent, leaving it in ruins. And when the few independent elector counts, the ones not claiming to be an emperor, elected Margreta of Marienburg as the new empress in 1979, the decision was so controversial, the Grand Theogenist of Sigmar refused the appointment. Sigmar's old empire was all but in ruins. The only time a semblance of unity was shown was in 2145, when the various factions united temporarily to defeat Vlad von Karstein, a vampire count who had slowly taken control of Sylvania again over the last few hundred years. And so we arrive in 2276, where this history comes to an end. The empire is fractured. 4 different rulers vying for the throne.
We have pistols now, actual flintlock pistols. So we've entered Renaissance period.
And beset on all sides, though in the west, the kingdom of Bretonnia is stronger than ever under the rule of Luon Orcslayer. The Wood Elves guard their woodland realm, though the High Elves, under the rule of Finubar the Seafarer, have slowly reopened relations with these new realms, trading with the Empire, Bretonnia, and the distant lands of Cathay. In the south, the reawakened Tomb King, Settra, continues his march of conquest, assaulting the Bretonnian client states known as the Border Princes, but for now, Nagash is seldom seen, and the vampire counts have recently been defeated, at least for a while. In the mountains and passes, the Dwarves still hold out against hordes of invading orcs and goblins, though a civil war in the Skaven Under-Empire has raged for so long that the loathsome rat men are little more than furry myths. And in the far north, in the realm of chaos, magic still pours into the world, and the forces of the ruinous powers are mobilizing once more. And that's it. We're up to speed. The era in which the old world is set is one that's never really...
It wasn't as bad as I thought.
...been investigated in detail before. The old Warhammer Fantasy setting was set around the early 2500s, about 250 years after all this. In that history... all this stuff was the prelude to another great war against chaos that would see the Empire reunited, but we're going to have to wait to find out if that turns out the same way. For now, hopefully that's got you in the mood for some gaming in the world of legend. I'm certainly ready to unite everyone under the beneficent and bony thumb of the Tomb Kings, and I'll do more of these as the factions are released. Thanks for watching.
Bye! Thank you for watching, guys. Now, if you want me to check out other stories here on YouTube, please let me know in the comments. We upload every weekend, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, as much as I want to, really. And don't forget to check out our Twitch channel where you can watch this dumpster fire go down live. Again, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps out with the algo. Now, class dismissed.